I need to rely on someone else to change my slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, let me say that this is a project that has the goal of measuring democracy, that is, rating how democratic different countries around the world are. And this came about, next slide, because there were a lot of democracy indicators already, hundreds if you count all of them, but most of them were too broad or didn't cover enough countries and time periods, and people really knew very little about their validity and reliability. And practitioners, like people who work for development agencies or NGOs, they needed finer grained measures to do program assessment. And researchers also needed better measures to tease apart different things that tended to be pretty correlated, and we needed valid and reliable data to have some confidence in findings. Next slide. So we formed a group called Varieties of Democracy, or VDEM, beginning between 2007 and 2010. It continues today, and the project has been very successful. We've produced nearly 30 million data points covering 202 countries from 1789 to 2020. And now our data are used by the World Bank, the United Nations, USAID, and many other development agencies, and needless to say, many researchers. So I'm going to be talking about concepts, how we collect the data, how we construct indices a little bit, and something about funding and how it's administered and the outreach we do. And then after I finish, Dan Pemstein, my colleague in VDEM, is going to talk about the measurement model. Next slide. So the conceptualization is definitely a challenge because democracy means many things to different people. It's a very complex, contested concept. So we address that problem by first recognizing that there are different varieties of democracy that are all considered legitimate, and we attempt to measure them all. And secondly, we're not content to stay at a very high level of aggregation, a very general, dealing with general concepts. We also break down the concept into its components and subcomponents and sub-subcomponents, et cetera. Next slide. So in terms of the complex concept, we recognize 5 different types of democracy, primarily electoral democracy, that says having elections is very important, and not just having elections, but having really good elections. We also recognize that this concept overlaps with some other principles like social and economic equality, or checks and balances in liberal democracy, or participatory democracy, or deliberative democracy, in which leaders need to justify their right to lead by engaging in respectful dialogue with the population. So we measure all of these things. Next slide. And we disaggregate the concept by breaking varieties into different varieties, but each one into electoral democracy and some other component. And then each of those components are further subdivided into subcomponents, and sometimes we go up to 6 or 7 levels of disaggregation. The purpose being that we, before we really start to measure anything, we break down the concept into its most specific components, things that are most likely to be objective and easily measurable, about which experts are less likely to disagree just because they're defining the concept in different ways. And then we measure each one of these concepts, and we reverse the process and construct indices out of the indicators to produce indices of components and higher level things until we end up with high level indices of 5 different types of democracy. Next slide. So in order to get this information, we have to identify people who have enough expertise to rate countries that they know well on a host of dozens or even hundreds of characteristics that are relevant for democracy, and often over a long span of time and annual data. The most objective ratings are centrally coded by a team of research assistants, things really objective like the date the elections were held and how many chambers of the parliament there are and things like that. But many of our ratings, most of our ratings are very subjective ratings that are coded by a large network of country experts using an online survey with mostly multiple choice questions. Next slide. So this is an example of one of our questions about election vote buying. So there's a simply stated question. In this national election, was there evidence of vote and or turnout buying? Often there's a little clarification about what we mean by all those terms, and then there's a set of usually multiple choice answers on an ordinal scale, going from yes to none. And our country experts read those answers and choose which one best describes the country year that they are rating, and they submit their answers. Next slide. These are some of our, not country experts, but our country managers, but people who have actually been working on VDEM, and it's a very diverse global sample of people. We've used more than 3,500 experts in over 180 countries around the world, and 63% of the raw scores we use in the project come from local experts, people who are nationals of or residents in the countries that they're rating. Next slide. Some characteristics about them in the aggregate. Almost 70% are either born in or reside in the country they coded. 2/3 are not born in a Western country. Almost all have some graduate education. Many are trained outside their country. They're mostly academics. Not as many as we would like are women. And the average person spends a mean of 17 hours on their coding assignment, or a median of 10 hours. Next slide. And they're roughly distributed pretty equally across countries, because we need to have a full complement of experts to code all of these countries. Some of the countries, such as US and Germany and UK, are overrepresented because those are people we know, or there are more people who are qualified, or people who migrate to those countries. But at any rate, it's probably very representative of world opinion, world expert opinion about these things. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the online interface that we use. It has a kind of a unique coding interface at the upper right, where there are decades in rows and individual years within decades in columns, and it allows people to click and drag to select a group of years that people deserve the same rating, and code them all at once. And it also, there's a little slider bar at the bottom center under the term confidence, that allows people to also assign a confidence rating for the ratings that they have assigned, like how confident are that they have assigned the correct rating for those country years that they selected. Next slide. So to administer this project, initially it's evolved. Initially it was a very large international team. There was a collaboration between the University of Gothenburg and the University of Notre Dame. Now, since we've made a lot of decisions about how we like to do things, all the data collection has been delegated to the VDEM Institute and the University of Gothenburg. Next slide. So here's our original team, the PIs at the top, and people who specialize on various specialized topics at the bottom. We needed expertise, people who knew a lot of different literatures to design and write the questions, and also people who had different area expertise to help us identify experts, although we also rely heavily on a network of regional managers who have their own networks of experts, and they suggest a lot of people. And I should say, we feel like we're kind of tapping the limits of the possibilities of recruiting experts for this project, because we need 5 to, in some cases, 20 experts. I think on average it's 11 experts per country to fill out our surveys. And there are just not that many people who have the kind of specialized knowledge and deep historical knowledge to answer questions on some countries around the world. Oh, next slide. So the VDEM Institute in Gothenburg has about 15 administrators, which include, well, administrators, data managers, research fellows, and research assistants. And the Institute coordinates an update of the data every year. And it uses an administrative database application to maintain correspondence with thousands, or records about thousands of country experts and potential country experts around the world. Can you go back a slide, please? It also does a lot of other things. It issues an annual report, publishes working papers, it holds conferences, it runs a speaker series, manages social media on Facebook and Twitter, and it maintains a website, which has been used a lot. More than 100,000 people around the world have downloaded copies of our data set in the last few years, since it went public in 2016. So, and the project has raised over $20 million to fund all this effort from a whole lot of different sources, and we're very grateful to people for that. And now recently it's been designated in a consortium that's part of Sweden's national research infrastructure, which almost guarantees funding indefinitely into the future. Final slide. These are some screenshots from our website. We make all of our data public, and people can visualize it in a whole different variety of formats, about a dozen different kinds of graphs and charts to look at the data. So I will stop there and hand it over to Dan Pemstein to talk about the measurement model.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much.